So thank you for taking the time to join us today. We sent out some information ahead of this meeting. It is it's a snapshot of the goals and objectives of the action agenda. And some people did send in some responses and ideas and recommendations. So thank you for doing that. And those have not been updated yet because we just got them today. And I'm going to kick this off to Jeff. What we're going to do, what the plan is, we're going to go over everything today. And then we're going to send it out again. We're requesting comments back to us by January 9th, just on this, what we're presenting. And then we're going to be sending a formatted draft of the action agenda, with all of the information that we've gathered and all the comments and all the input. We're going to be sending that formatted draft to this group by close of business on February 9th. And then we are going to have another meeting with this group on February 15th at 1 o'clock. And we'll be sending out a calendar invite. We hope that you can all join us again. And then after that meeting, we're asking for final feedback comments by February 20th. And then we have 2 public meetings scheduled. One is February 27th in Walton. And then the other one is February 28th in Sullivan County. The location is to be determined. They're going to be at, I believe, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 1 to 3. And then we're going to have a Zoom meeting on the evening of March 5th, 6 to 8. For anyone who can't get to the in-person public meetings or wants to see it again, or we're just trying to cover everybody's needs. And then after those public meetings, we're going to ask for feedback by March 12th. And then we're going to work on the final draft and then we're going to be sharing that with everyone. So if anyone has any questions, you can place it in the chat. You can raise your hand. A lot of people, so that's probably the most convenient way. And I'm going to kick it over right now to Jeff, who is going to start going over the presentation that we have shared with everyone prior to this meeting.
Okay, thank you, Sherry. I think I know most of you. Hello to those of you who I work with regularly, and thanks for everybody joining and committing your time to this process. It's a big effort, watershed planning for the entire Upper Delaware. Jillian, do we have the PowerPoint ready to go? Okay.
I have it pulled up. Just let me know when you want me to start it.
All right, let's get started. So, I mean, this says, Sherry already said it. This does say action agenda, but this is really just a very high, sort of broad, high points approach to a couple of the substantive sections of what the ultimate action agenda will be. For those of you who got a chance to look at it, it's big and broad. We're trying to, we're hitting a lot of points, and we want to check off with you folks that these are, that there's good thinking around this, but we recognize that at the end product here is going to have to be something that's going to be narrowed down and prioritized a little bit more. And it's going to, be a lot more specific about assignments and timelines, identified projects, and that sort of thing. So I just want to make sure this, this says action agenda, but it's really kind of a piece of, it will ultimately be a substantive piece of the end product, of which Sherry just gave you the timeline of how we're moving forward here. So, if you look at, just real quick, for some of you who may not have been on all the calls leading up to this, the map on the right there, that is, the Upper Delaware watershed. That is the geographic jurisdiction of the working area we're in, of which I assume that most of you are very familiar with. But we start all the way at the top up there of the New York City watershed and go all the way down through the Neversink, the tailwaters, the Neversink, and down to Port Jervis. This is a New York funded program. So it's the New York portion of the Upper Delaware watershed that we are working in. And of course, there's a whole piece over in Northeast Pennsylvania that would be to the left of that map, where our organization, FUDR, also does work. But for the purposes of this exercise, we are focusing on the New York portion of the watershed. The big pieces, of course, are the East Branch and Upper East Branch and West Branch, and they meet in Hancock, and there's the main stem going down through Callicoon to Port Jervis. Then there's also the big Beaver Kill Weemock system. As we work our way down, we've got a few watersheds that are sort of standalone down in the Callicoon Narrowsburg area. And then the Neversink watershed is kind of towards the bottom there. And we have a whole separate watershed planning effort going on there that's funded through the federal Delaware River program. So lots going on with watershed planning. It's a big task, and we're thankful that you're all here and helping us. So go ahead, Jillian. This is the three pieces we want to cover today. I'll do numbers 1 and 2. We have a lot of slides. For those of you who got a chance to look at them, you know that I'm going to go pretty quickly through them. But the goals, strategies, and objectives is part 1. We have recommendations in there. And the re-grant program. Part 1 and 2 comes a lot from the feedback we've gotten from all the meetings we've had across the watershed with all kinds of different stakeholders. So hopefully it's a reflection of everything that we've heard. And again, we're going to have to do some more detailed work with all this stuff to get down to the level of, the metrics that an action agenda will ultimately need to have. So go ahead, Jillian. What is the action agenda? It's a 5-year plan. It relies on everybody who has a stake in the watershed, including the leaders on this call, but many, many, many other people. It has been funded, as I said, by the state of New York, and it's modeled after the federal program, which is that is the outline of this action that you'll see today is large part borrows from the federal outline, as was stated in the initial statutory legislation in the New York State budget back a few years ago, where the DRBCA, the Delaware River Basin Conservation, DRBC, I'm blanking on that. But the Delaware River Basin Conservation Act, sorry. That was the federal program that was enacted around 2017 for the entire Delaware River Basin, and we have a close association with that. The federal partners, some of which I think are on this call, are also members of this committee. We work very closely with and kind of model a lot of our efforts after that. This fourth bullet, we've heard a lot of people talk about, there are all kinds of plans going on. I mentioned the Neversink plan that we're doing, but and then we have a separate list here that Sherry has shared in her email to all of you, if you got a chance to see that. There's a lot of plans out there, and making sense of all of them and piecing them all together, making sure they're all represented in this larger plan. It's a big challenge. So we're again thankful for your thoughts and assistance on your engagement in those plans and bringing them to our attention and explaining to us what they are. Our plan is not meant to replace them; it is meant to boost them. I hope that makes sense to everybody. And again, and this point here, we have to get a little bit more level of detail with the quantifiable elements of the action agenda, which we will be working on and are working on now as we work towards the final product. A big piece of the action agenda is a re-grant program, which Molly will talk about at the end of this presentation. And that's simply channeling some of the state funding through the administration of the program to boots on the ground. Organizations and institutions that are able to advance the objectives of the action agenda will be eligible for re-grant funding as we move forward with the program. And then finally, we're seeking, and our partner Karen from New York State DEC is on the phone today. This is an action agenda needs to be approved by the New York State DEC and considered as an approved watershed plan to maximize its effectiveness and to reach out and secure all of the program attachments that come with being an approved New York State DEC watershed plan. So go ahead, Jillian. 4 goals, and then this is where we're mirroring the federal program. It's wildlife, it's clean water for people, plants, and animals, it's flooding, flood resilient communities, and recreational. These are the 4 pillars we're kind of building upon, as did the federal Delaware River program. Go ahead, Jillian. And underneath that, we have 5 strategies. This is number 1. We've been doing this for quite some time now at all levels. We're engaging, obviously you can't do a watershed plan without talking to the public. And I think we've done extensive outreach and education and listened to citizens, and heard you. And there's a lot of that, again, reflected in this presentation and will ultimately be the finished product of an action agenda. Facilitate strategic planning to maximize adaptive potential of natural systems and changing watershed conditions. There's a lot of thinkers out there. There's a lot of watershed leaders out there. We want to make sure that we are tapping into, their thoughts and at the kind of local level or sub-basin level, and to help to the extent that we can keep that going, bring additional resources in, provide guidance, that sort of thing. More science. I know that, our work in the here and where we are located in the tailwaters is, a great example of where, we could definitely use more science. And I think this is applicable across the watershed. So this is going to be a strategy that we employ to, bring more, as it says, planning, monitoring, research activities, which will, I think, enhance our ability to protect and restore the watershed. Similarly to providing technical assistance for restoration and conservation activities, this is just something that has to happen if we're talking about protection and restoration goals, and conserve areas of regional significance. And we have some of those areas that we've talked about in our public meetings and are identified here. So go ahead, Jillian. And if people want to just throw in the chat, they can. So a little bit more about the goals. I'm not going to go through all of these objectives, but for healthy wildlife, and these are some, these are some things that, we can engage in, promote, support, identify that will advance this goal. Barriers to fish passage and restoring in-stream habitat, forests and buffers and wetlands, corridors, and improving habitat resilience, in addressing the challenge of invasive species that we have in the Upper Delaware River watershed, and remediating areas that have already been degraded. So go ahead, Jillian. Clean water. This was this is a mainstay of any watershed protection program. We're in an area where we're blessed in some ways with clean water. This is not an urban watershed where we have really steep pollution challenges. We certainly have our challenges, but I think this is a good, we're in a good place with where we're starting here with relatively clean water. Compared to watersheds across the crowded northeastern U.S., we're doing pretty good in the Upper Delaware. Non-point source, we have, sedimentation, I think, is a really good example of a problem that we see across the watershed. In fact, it might be the biggest non-point problem that we have. We certainly have our nutrient inputs from various land use activities, toxic discharge and point sources. We have some of those, but we talk a little bit later about permitting and ensuring that point source permits are implemented and enforced as necessary. But I think largely we're in a watershed where non-point sources are the biggest problem. Healthy forests. We have a lot of forests, and they do a lot of good things for protecting water quality. Eradication of invasive species. I think John Thompson's on the phone and sent us a comment this morning or yesterday. That's not a good word, right, John? I think we knew that. We just somehow that got in there somehow. But I recognize your comment, John. If you want to say a couple words, please go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. So eradication wouldn't be possible for most of the invasive species here, but I made some recommendations for verbiage on the slide further down about invasive species. But just in general, I think that mitigating the impacts of invasive species is really important. And then also we could focus more on education about invasive species and trying to change behavior of the people that are moving the invasive species.
Right, exactly. Thank you, John. I think about our Japanese knotweed here and all on the main corridor here, and then, yeah, the word eradication, that would be a bit of a delusional objective, just if you see, anyone who's been up here has seen the extent of that problem. So, okay, go ahead, Jillian. Flooding is another third pillar of the watershed plan. This is something we hear everywhere we go. Every government official in the watershed has this on their mind. Pat O'Brien from the town of Hancock has joined me here in the office, and he's looking at me, shaking his head, going, "Yeah, that's a good idea that you guys address that." It's something we hear. It's something our elected officials and and other stakeholders hear about all the time with climate change and increasing severity and frequency of storm events, and what are the ways in which we can address that. We think back to the early 2000s, some big storms hit here and it caused nightmares for our local municipalities, and everybody remembers like it was yesterday. And we've come some distance with that, but I think there's a lot of other a lot of things that we can do to address that, and some of them are listed here. So this is really high on our list of priorities, and we're going to have to drill down a little deeper here on these objectives and think of things the sort of measurable things we can do to make progress over the next 5 years with this plan to help communities mitigate the impacts of flooding, which is, as I said, we believe with the weather changes is going to continue to be a major challenge in this very wet part of the world we live in. Go ahead, Jillian. Recreation, we feel, is a big part of watershed planning. It has everything to do with, promoting our natural resources and benefiting our local economies. This is as we talk to all of our elected officials across the watershed, this always comes up. We had a long conversation down in Port Jervis, I think, about their interests in getting some assistance on a boat ramp. I think I used that example a little bit later, to increase increase access to the river, track tourism economy, that sort of thing. So go ahead, Jillian. Our strategies to get there, engaging the public through outreach and education, talk about the economy. This picture here was a river fest we did up in Downsville, New York, just below the Papacton Dam. So cold that day, but we were able to get a lot of people out to kind of celebrate the river, had supporting organizations, lots of educational materials, lots of outreach happening, a lot of network going on. We plan to do this every year now. We'll be in deposit next year, but it's just an example of the kinds of activities that we can organize to, provide some basic education and kind of instruct and guide citizens and residents who care about the watershed and the rivers and streams, to give them ideas for how they can plug into advancing our objectives. Go ahead, Jillian. Strategic planning, identifying, conserve, restore natural habitats in unique areas, things like floodplain connection. These things take thought. They just don't happen. They take people, they take organizations, they take partnerships, they take technical knowledge. There's a lot of, it just says strategic planning that goes into something like, for example, this project that's pictured here. Hope you all can see the sort of erosiveness on the right and the gravel on the left, and both of those things are reduced in the after picture there. That took a lot of people, a lot of thinking, a lot of organizing, a lot of technical knowledge, and a lot of fundraising to get that done. Go ahead, Jillian. Science, we need to do more actual field gathering of data. That picture there, I believe, is a crew that's either FUDR's crew or TU's crew, that we actually, during the summer season, we send a core of groups out to do, actually taking a look at water quality and culverts and bugs and all kinds of things. We have to do more of this. We need a lot more of this in the Upper Delaware River watershed. We need to build databases at all levels So we have a better scientific understanding of the watershed that will help us to, more fully develop our goals and objectives and reach our implementation goals to actually get out there and do the work that needs to get done. Go ahead, Jillian. Technical assistance, very similar. We have a lot of we have a lot of agencies and organizations and people that are engaged in one way or another in restoration. And I hope that this watershed plan can kind of connect all that and make sure that we're maximizing all the resources that we do have out there. A lot of them are, a lot of you on the phone today represent agencies and organizations that one way or another can help us get to the end goal, which is what you're seeing here on the right, which is an actual again, another example of a restoration project where, we took a left bank problem there and we did something with it. And ultimately that after picture will look a lot better as things grow in. But these are the kinds of, metrics that we want in our action agenda. Like how, where are these projects? Who are the agencies that are, plugged into them and that can help? What are the water quality metrics, after we get it done, that sort of thing. These are the kind of things we're going to be identifying, in our final action agenda. Go ahead, Jillian. Areas of regional significance. We have, an incredible watershed that has really special places. Our work in the Neversink, for example, is, we talk a lot about the Bashikill wetland system. If anybody's familiar with that, that's a really beautiful place and has a lot of DEC kind of recognition. And, we're exploring ways to, keep that, protected. And, there are things we can do to expand protections or increase citizen, access to it. So I think this is a strategy, will be a strategy in our action agenda. Go ahead, Jillian. We also just want to provide sort of some broad, recommendations around, around the direction that the action agenda is taking. But, we want to reinforce here, at a really high level, kind of, again, another way of defining what this is. But, the key words here are collaborative, that's what we're, all
Next
of you.
week, you're gonna be meeting down there in McDonald's.
Okay.
Hey, yeah, okay, Jerry's on mute now. Collaborative is the key word here. All watershed stakeholders, everybody needs to be engaged. Voluntary is very, very important. This is not a, regulatory, this is not a regulatory document in any way. All the work that gets prescribed in this is going to have to be done through collaborative, voluntary efforts by all kinds of watershed practitioners. We may talk about regulations and regulatory approaches where needed, but this is in no way, of course, a regulatory document. It does not prescribe anything new in terms of laws, rules, regulations at any level, state or local. So, okay, go ahead. A giant piece of this is to, get down to the project level, right? This is what it's all about. Like we, at the end of the day, we want to support all kinds of elements of watershed planning and prop them up. Some of them I've already talked about today, but really in some ways, the project identification is so important here because that's going to be a huge metric for in the action agenda. Where, what are the projects? We've already done some projects as part of this effort, building a list and prioritizing that list, developing metrics for, what are the outcomes of the projects, that sort of thing. I just, I already cited the, I guess the Port Jervis boat ramp is not actually it's maybe not a protection and restoration, it's more public access, but it's still a good example. And then, Waters Stream Corridor Management Plan and the East Branch Levee is a thing that's been going on for years here. And, this is a great example of, we're not inventing this project. It already exists. It already has energy. It's moving ahead, but to the extent that it might need any assistance, through our efforts here, that's what we'd like to see happen through this plan. So go ahead, Jillian. Funding can never escape, the need for funding, I think, as everybody on this phone call knows. And these are just a couple of examples, or, these are some examples of either where funding is coming from or what we're gonna use it for. That first bullet is actually at the federal level. There's a bunch of acronyms that fly around, but it's essentially the Federal Delaware River Program. And the funds are administered through something called the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund, which is associated with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. That's an annual grant program that's coming up, by the way. The RFP is going to be coming out on that in a couple of weeks, I think. And applications will be due, I think, by the end of March, maybe. And all of you will receive information about that. And it's, that's something that we have been very aggressive about. We, UDR, Trout Unlimited, a couple other organizations, in tapping into since 2017. And, I think this effort, this is a complementary state-funded effort that we're talking about here, fits very nicely into this sort of portfolio of funding opportunities. And as I said, it's actually, is mirrored after this program, the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund at the federal level. So I think that will give us us, meaning the collective us, a leg up in securing funding, that the needs of which will be identified in the action agenda. New York State budget funding is the core funding for what we're all doing here right now, through the New York State Legislature and the New York State DEC. This is how the funding became available to us, is through the budget process, of which we are neck deep in right now. The governor will be announcing her budget proposal in a matter of weeks. And we hope that our funding will continue to be in there to continue doing what we're doing here. And then there's the larger New York State Environmental Protection Fund, that should say. There are opportunities in that for everybody on this phone call, I think, who are engaged in restoration projects to utilize. These are just three big examples. There are other examples out there as well, some of which we don't know about yet, or need to learn more about. But in order to make this action agenda real, we're going to have to work together to identify and secure funding at every level, to get done what we want to get done here. And part of that is, this fourth bullet is something we put in here because match funding for grants is such a challenge for us, particularly with that federal program. We've done so well in securing federal funding, but over the years, since about 2018, the match funding gets more and more difficult. And so, the state funding, that's kind of why we went to New York State, because we felt like an investment from New York State could help leverage the federal funding. And that's what's happened here. So, but we'll need, the federal program is a 1-to-1 match for projects, and that's hard to find. And it's increasingly harder to find as the years go by. I have an example in here, the Never Sink Watershed Management Plan. That is a similar process to this one, focused on the Never Sink. That was funded by the first bullet there, the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund. So go ahead, Jillian. Open space, we were working with Kate Rahman at Open Space, Natural Lands, to put together open space implementation objectives for our action agenda. Again, which will include project identification and certain metrics. We work with them in the Never Sink as well. And, there's the Never Sink. If anybody's been down to the Gorge and the Never Sink, or the Never Sink unique area, DEC area, there's a lot of conversation about the future protection of that and improvements that can be made. Go ahead, Jillian. Again, the projects I've already mentioned the goal here of, projects are in large part, how we're going to measure our success with our watershed plan and our action agenda. And the kinds of things, I'm not sure that's a comprehensive list, but I know these are the kind of things we're most familiar with, that we have been talking across the watershed to town officials everywhere, And they are giving us, you know, lists of projects that they need help on. A lot of, this is maybe the culverts on the left there that you see where they've taken a kind of old and degraded culvert on the left. It's not functioning very well. It's kind of small and it's raised up there. It's creating a little, I think that's called a perched system. And we took all that out and put in, you know, a three-sided box here with much wider natural stream bottom, you know, good for fish passage, that sort of thing. That's a great example of the kind of projects that we engage in a lot in partnership with Trout Unlimited and other partners. But there are more things. This is not a comprehensive list, but it's the stuff that we are most familiar with. Go ahead, Jillian. So development, I mean, one of the challenges of our action agenda is we have like 4 or 5 distinct areas in the upper Delaware River watershed in New York, and not every place is the same, right? This is not a uniform landscape. And so we learned that very well in our Never Sink work, where we brought, you know, had a giant public meetings and we brought in everybody who cared. And guess what 90% of the meeting was down in the Sullivan County, you know, the more urbanized area of the watershed. It was, you know, we are worried about development and you know, we're not sure it's always as well thought out as it needs to be. And what are the impacts of it going to be on water quality and people? And, you know, we literally put big Post-it notes up on the wall and we said, well, tell us what, you know, what's going to fix that? And then that's where they started moving towards, you know, maybe some of the more regulatory stuff like zoning and particularly zoning, I suppose. But, you know, there's not even, you know, there are places in the watershed where we're just not as far along in our thinking about how we plan our activities and how we plan our communities. And now we're starting to see some of the results of that. You can't pick up the Sullivan County paper, for those of you down there know, I think it comes out twice a week. You can't pick that paper up without reading about some development project that's drawing attention and people are worried and town officials are taking a lot of heat from both sides. And, you know, it's a really dominating conversation in some parts of the watershed. Okay, Jillian, go ahead. We mentioned here and I think Lori's on from the Upper Delaware Council, National Park Service, groups like CRISP, the invasive species group up in the Catskills. We have to work closely with our resource agencies. There's more than just those two, but they're sort of the ones I think we see the most on invasive species. We talked about that a moment ago. And there you go. There's a picture of that knotweed, you know, picture dozens and dozens and dozens of miles of thick knotweed cover on both sides of the river. And that's, for those of you who've been up our way, you know how daunting, you don't have to be a scientist to know how daunting that would be to, as John says, eradicate. So the key word here is going to be control. And, you know, what are the ways to do that? How do we, you know, engage our partners in that? How do we prioritize what's most, you know, we've got a handful of invasive species, at least what's most important? Where is the funding available for that? These are the kind of metrics we've got to nail down in the action agenda. And these are the groups that pay attention to invasive species. I'm sure there's others. Go ahead, Jillian. Municipal officials, I have one sitting here right in my room, Pat from the town of Hancock. I think he would agree with us that, you know, there's always a need for more education and training at the town level, the municipal level on watershed protection, the kind of things you can do that have multiple benefits. You know, with these restoration projects that we're talking about, it's not just water quality or habitat. It's also flood mitigation and recreation. These are the kind of things that municipal officials have on their mind. You know, those of us from the environmental community, we think about fish and water quality, and you know, but a town official has to think about a whole lot more. And you know, there are activities that they're engaged in through their planning boards and their highway departments, and their flood people and their stormwater people. And I think, you know, some of the metrics we want to nail down for the action agenda will be, how can we facilitate this kind of thing to make sure our municipal officials are, you know, as close as they can be to the cutting edge of thinking on how we're, you know, addressing all of these problems in a multidimensional way. Go ahead, Julian. The reservoirs play a huge role for a big part of the watershed, both above them and below them. These are the Cannonsville, Papacton, and Neversink reservoirs. Everything above them we refer to as the New York City watershed. Don't know if Brent from New York City is on the call today, but he works very closely with the flexible flow management program that's noted down there. That has a lot to do with water, with habitat, with flooding, all these things we're talking about. So it's a unique, for our watershed, this is a unique situation, right? We have the 50% of the water supply of the largest city, I think, in the country, right? Or one of them is right here in our own Upper Delaware watershed. And, you know, the water in those reservoirs can go two ways. They can go to New York City for water supply, or they can come down the river, and are important for all kinds of things, for local economies and local environmental conditions. And there's a whole plan that's built up around them. My own organization spent a lot of time thinking about that plan, and seems like sometimes we're in touch with New York City almost, you know, maybe at least once a week, or something that's going on with which way is the water going and how much of the water's coming or not coming. So this is in our watershed, this is a really big deal. Go ahead, Jillian. We already talked a bit about this climate and flood. You know, it threatens people, it threatens local economies, it exacerbates the already erosive conditions of our tributaries in accelerated ways. We have to figure out kind of what are the thing, again, what are the projects we can engage in, what are the activities we can engage in that are real, that are measurable, that that are going to make a difference. For example, the floodplain mapping. We have some outdated mapping issues with floodplains. What can we put in this action agenda that we're actually going to do, right? Who we're going to work with, and what is it we're going to do, and by when, to improve, to help mitigate flooding when we're dealing with our problems with floodplains, wetlands, etc., dams. Go ahead, Jillian. Regional tourism has just become an increasingly popular thing to talk about here. The river has, I've been here about 11 years now, and this every year seems to get more and more front of mind. What are the activities that, bring people here and help stimulate the economy and help, enhance the conservation stewardship that we need? We need that thinking. Are there agencies at the local level, tourism bureaus, and at the county or local level that we can work with and help promote and identify, again, these measurable objectives that we need to identify for our action agenda? Go ahead, Jillian. These aren't the only ones, but they're two predominant ones. Obviously, DEC, we're directly involved with the DEC with this effort through the state legislature and the state funding. And of course, the National Park Service sits right in our own backyard. We have a national park unit, scenic and recreational river from Hancock all the way down, almost all the way down, I think. And they play a huge role. The National Park Service has there's a river management plan and land and water use guidelines, and we can never have a watershed plan without talking about them. Lori, again, is here from Upper Delaware Council, will be helping us kind of figure out where can this watershed, where can our action agenda plug in the best way, in the ways that will achieve the most measurable accomplishments, with the engagement and support of these two big regulatory agencies that have a prominent presence in the Upper Delaware River watershed. And I think I've talked enough about this. We need people. We need people. This is an example of a picture of I think one of our meetings on the Neversink, and you see maps, right? You see people that live there, and they're helping us. They're pointing out places like, I remember this place used to be my fishing hole, or this place is really got a big erosive problem, or that culvert is broken and caving in here. And we're writing that stuff down. And we're putting that on a project list, and then we're going to have to figure out how to prioritize them and operationalize around them, find funding for them. But we also need a longer term goal at the sub watershed level. Wouldn't it be great to have, for example, Friends of the Never Sink Watershed? Right now that doesn't exist, right? We need, people who are stewards of the watershed and can dedicate their time and energy on an ongoing basis to make sure that all the things we're putting in our action agenda are going to continue on. Go ahead, Jillian. Recreation, I've already talked a lot about this. I think there's a lot more potential. I see a lot of activities sort of in the southern part of the watershed with trail systems and greenways. We're working with the Sullivan County Planning Department on a couple of interesting projects. I think as you move further north, into the middle section, there's probably a need, I think maybe a little bit more of a need for trail systems along the river, a little bit organizing among municipalities, talking about how we can promote, use the natural resources in our watershed to promote recreation for people to get outside and enjoy, have access to and enjoy the watershed. Go ahead, Jillian. Water project inventory, as I mentioned, the project, the projects are the heart and soul in a way of the implementation of the action agenda. What are we doing if we're not identifying projects and assigning people to do them? And we need help with that. So, one way to do that, municipalities, if they're not doing it already, they should have, a list of, and this is the conversation we're having with all of them. It's been interesting to go to almost every municipality in the Upper Delaware River watershed. And we were talking to either their highway people or their town supervisors or other leaders. And, some of them come prepared with like a whole list, right? They have it for us when we get there, and others are kind of like, well, what are you looking for? So we're getting different responses from different places, but we are slowly building a list from what we hear from all these meetings, and that's just a starting place. And then there's all kinds of other things you have to do. What kinds of, what's the filter for how you prioritize those lists? Things like, is there funding available? Is there public support? Is the landowner okay with that? How far along in the permitting process, if at all, are you? This is the kind of thing that we, want to work with municipalities on and develop more specific criteria in our action agenda. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. Sorry for the long-winded effort there, but this is, I hope, a good glimpse at the kind of high-level thinking about the sort of the backbone of the action agenda. Next step again is to drill down on what are the metrics and the implementing agencies and the projects and that sort of thing, the timelines, funding. So with that, Molly, I hope you're still with us, and
I am. Yep.
and you can talk about the re-grant program.
Sure. Hi, everyone. You can go to the next slide, Jillian. So as part of this effort, we have in the first year, we had, gosh, what did we have? Think about a 200, was it 150,000? I think that went out in projects in the first year. We have more in the second year. And we hope to get more and more every year to help implement projects and offset, as Jeff was saying, some of that match need to continue to bring in funding from the federal GWCF program. So, a big part of the action agenda is project identification and prioritization. And, that is really happening and will continue to happen with the municipalities and other nonprofits that are working in the region to get a sense of, what the highest priority projects are in each area of the watershed. And then, once we have a sense of kind of what the priorities are, what the themes are that are most important, then we get to re-grant the funding that we get from New York State to help implement projects. So, the re-grant program will very closely follow the suggestions made in the action agenda. You can go to the next slide, Jillian. So this will advance watershed protection and conservation, will create connections between federal and state and hopefully also local funding, and eventually implement the action agenda. Go to the next slide. So municipal governments, 501c3s, universities, and other academic institutions are qualified applicants. And this closely mirrors, if doesn't exactly duplicate the guidelines from the federal program. So it's the intent that the same people that can apply for funding from the federal program can also apply at the state level. Next slide. So there are several kind of important pieces that are necessary for this application. So the goal of the program is to spend the money in the calendar year that it's awarded for. You know, obviously this may not always happen as hiccups arise from time to time, but you know, essentially, you know, we're emphasizing that the project must be ready in the year of implementation, or in the calendar year of the grant program. So the funding that's awarded right now must be spent in 2025. And hopefully this sounds familiar from when we went through projects. That was probably 2 or so months ago that we had that kind of discussion about the projects that would be funded in 2024. So in the next application period, the funding must be spent in 2025. We'll get extra points for projects that have secured funding through the DWCF. So it's really our intent to use this money to leverage as much additional funding as possible. We want to advance the conservation goals in the action agenda. It'll be important to us if this project is identified in another plan that's been developed in the Upper Delaware. So if that's the case, that would, you know, that's great. Obviously, if it's in the action agenda, if there are multiple partners, if you have landowner support and or public support, if there are multiple conservation benefits. So for example, if it benefits fish habitat and also has a flooding benefit, that would be, you know, a higher scoring project. And then also if there is consideration to, or we will require consideration of JEDI and, you know, just sort of a general community description to identify the community that this is impacting. So the timeline for 2024, so the funding to be used in 2025, is that the application will be due October 18th. So at that point, the federal program applications should have been awarded by then. So applicants to this program will know if they have been awarded funding from the federal program, so that their kind of entire funding package is likely together and the project is ready for implementation in 2025. A kind of a secondary outcome of this is that we can become aware of projects that are in the planning process that are getting to a more serious planning stage. So if the full funding is not together, we are essentially planning on putting together a list of projects that are, you know, like likely to be funded in following years. It's kind of, it's somewhat complicated because we cannot give away funding that we don't have yet. But we do want to, when an applicant is applying for other funds outside of this re-grant program, we want that funder to know that the project is on our radar, that it is a priority project for us. It's not awarded funding yet, but we want to, you know, sort of word that in a way that that the other funder would know that, you know, it has a high likelihood of getting funding through this. So we're trying to find the balance because, you know, we need the project to be fully funded in order to fund it. And we also want to give people the tools to get the rest of the funding. So it's a kind of a funny, like chicken and egg situation that we're in there, but we are going to do what we can to try to help people get the rest of their funding in place. Oh, can you go back for just a second? So after that application, the steering committee will approve, a subset of the steering committee will review it. We'll make a recommendation set to the full steering committee to approve, which is this group. Conditional awards will be made at the end of November. And then we actually have to go through our contract process with DEC. So the awards even if they're approved by the steering committee, they're not really considered final until they're in the FUDR DEC contract. Next slide. So this is, I'm not going to go through all of this, but this is kind of an overview of the content of the application. Next slide. The subcommittee of the steering committee will review and score and share the funding recommendations, as I mentioned. And projects will score based on how they meet the objectives that we went through earlier. Next slide. Okay, so this questions and comments is not only questions and comments for me, but on the whole presentation. So feel free to put questions in the chat, or if anyone would like to take themselves off of mute or raise their hand, we can facilitate questions and answers. If there are none, per Sherry's comment in, Lori, there will not be a local match requirement, but it will, that would be something that we would look favorably upon if, in that scoring process. And it will probably, just to give a little bit more detail about that, it will probably be less specifically about cash match and more about demonstration of local support for the project. So that could come in the form of in-kind match, letters of support. We just are most certainly going to want to know that there is local support for that project. And again, if there aren't any other questions, comments are due on today's presentation by the 9th. We are going to be sending out this recording to the whole group. This meeting is a little off of our normal schedule, so I know some people who couldn't come who will be watching and sharing comments with us through email or follow-up phone calls. And if there aren't any questions, I think we're all set. Jeff, Sherry, anybody else have any other last word?
No, thanks, Molly. I will, like Molly said, I'll be sending out the recording and calendar invites for these next meetings, and you can always email us if you think of something or call us. I don't have anything else.
Thank you, everyone. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Keep up the good work.
Yeah, exactly.
you,
That was
Rob.
really good. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Brenda.
Good job.
Thank you.
All right.